You're listening to Season 4 of the Devoted Dreamers podcast. Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Merritt Ansa, and this show exists to help you step over whatever is holding you back from all that God created you for. You know, the more I talk to women about their dreams, the more I hear the echoes of fear, imposter syndrome, of who am I to do this, or somebody else is already doing it, or could do it better than me. I recognize those voices because I've wrestled with them too. But I'm here to tell you that you cannot let the voices win because you are a daughter of the King. God created you with a purpose, one that's unique to you, and He put those dreams in your heart for a reason. Sure, it's scary. Yeah, you might even fail, but you also might learn something and then pick yourself up and lock arms with your community and keep taking the next step. That's why we're here, and it's what this podcast is all about. And I pray today's episode will provide exactly what you need to keep moving forward toward the dream God has put on your heart. You'll always find the show notes for each episode on my website at merrittansa.com/podcast. And there will be more later in the show about how to connect with me and the Devoted Dreamers tribe. But now, here's today's episode. Hello, Devoted Dreamer. You are listening to episode 91 of the Devoted Dreamers podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I so look forward to introducing you to Teresa Swanstrom Anderson. She is local here to Denver, and kind of found her, actually, I don't even know if I've told you this, Teresa. I originally found you through the If Gathering Colorado Facebook group.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, discovered you there and kind of stalked you a little bit via your website. But I'll share a little bit about you. So Teresa has a husband and 6 children. What did you just say? 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 18. Oh, my word. Oh, that's a house full.
It makes me laugh just hearing someone say it.
Yeah, it probably feels totally normal to you. But for me, of 1 and 1 on the way, it sounds like a lot. But 4 of your kiddos were born in Ethiopia. And Teresa writes and speaks about motherhood, adoption, and following your passions. She's got a new book that just came out on May 15th called Beautifully Interrupted. And we are going to get to hear about that and lots of other aspects of her life and her dreams. So Teresa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's really fun to have you on. So, gosh, I feel like we have a lot of directions that we can go. One of the things I read on your website was that in the book you share about just your story of realizing you weren't involving God in your plans. Mm-hmm. So maybe either start us off there or talk about what you feel like the dream is that God gave you when you finally did start involving Him in your plans.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. So shortly after graduating college, my plan was to go on and get my master's and get my doctorate in art history. And I really thought what a great idea it would be to move to Italy and be a curator at some fantastic museum, and be a light for God in the art world. And I realized one day that it was a great idea. However, I had never consulted God in any of it. And I lived in Seattle at the time. That's where I mostly grew up. And there was a spot overlooking the Space Needle. In fact, if you watch Grey's Anatomy, it's a constant shot on that show. It's in Cary Park is what it's called. And there was a bench that I sat on all the time to do my devotions. I just journal and read my Bible and pray. And one day while sitting there, I just felt like God was whispering to me that there was something more and something bigger. And so I held my hands out to Him and just said the words yes and send me. And I didn't know where he was sending me. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know what that included. But I figured, if the Lord created me to be born in this exact moment in history, in this country with this particular family, or, whatever it is, he's got to have an actual plan for me. And who am I to get so busy planning that he gets kind of missed in the shuffle? So that is kind of where it all began. And it wasn't like the next day I knew exactly what he was impressing upon my heart, but pretty quickly I knew I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I did know what I was not supposed to do. And I felt pretty quickly that I was not supposed to continue on with my education in art history. And at the time, I had worked my way up all through college, working at a restaurant. And at that time, I was managing it. And just had a big waiting period in that little restaurant, and then on to an office job, and struggled in my weight. And I think that a lot of us really struggle in that. And it took me a while to realize that he was doing a lot of character building during that time. And I think that we think of weight as wintry and barren and hard, but it's during winter that our roots grow deep. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of how it all began. Oh, and I didn't want kids.
Wow.
That's a big part.
God's funny.
Changed my opinion on that.
Yeah. So this scene that you painted for us back in Seattle, how old were you at that point, or what season of life were you in?
I was, let's see, like 23, 24.
Okay. And what happened? What happened next? How did you end up with a husband and 6 kids?
So when I was working in that little office job, and I talk about this in the book, that, I was praying that the Lord would open all these doors for me, and I was getting really frustrated when doors were not opening. And I realized I can't pray for open doors if I get frustrated by closed ones, because every closed door leads me one step closer to the one that swings wide open. So I just kind of hunkered down in that little cubicle for a while, a couple years, and just was like, okay, God, you have me here for some weird reason. It was very, very obvious that I was to work there. And I ended up marrying one of the guys that worked there.
Ah.
We became best friends. And he actually, my dad was his mentor a couple years before I even met him. And the Lord used that sweet season to just become really good friends with someone first, and to see what he was like when work deals went well or when they went south, or to see him in good relationships and lousy ones, and how he handled things. And I saw adventure in him. He decided one day he wanted to learn how to bull ride. So he went to bull riding camp in Kansas one weekend. And he would go to Alaska and barefoot water ski. And I liked the adventure that I saw in him. And he is a man that loves Jesus dearly. And so that is obviously why I needed to work there, so that I could not only be friends with him, but see him in and out of life itself.
Yeah, that's a great way to start a relationship, is to kind of know somebody's good and bad before you even really get into the heavy duty attraction.
Exactly. Yeah. So we realized we were in love one day, and officially dated 4 months, got engaged. We're engaged 4 months. So once we were in, we were all in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so
Fast forward to today, how would you describe like the dream that God's given you for your life? What's that? What are the words around that?
Well, gosh, one of complete surrender, because I've realized through the years that even though He gives an exciting sounding calling, it's hard. And a lot of what we've done is crazy and big. And there have been times where family and friends literally said, "You are going to destroy your family. If you do this, you are so naive. You're taking on too much too quick." And we almost didn't bring home one of our kids because not a single person, whether friend, pastor, family member, not a single one supported us bringing them home because they did think that we were going too big too fast. And we've realized through the years that it's often those crazy sounding things, whether too big or maybe even too small. You know, maybe someone is a CEO of some major company and they really feel like the Lord is asking them to step down and just stay home and be a mom, or, you know, step down and work at a nonprofit instead, or something like that. Sometimes we undervalue the things that the Lord is impressing on us because they sound scary or crazy.
Mm. So you have 4 kids you've brought home from Ethiopia, and did they all come at different times, or did some come together?
So when we call our biological boys our little blondies, so when our little blondies were 3 and 4, we brought home Imani, who is now 6. And at the time, she was 5 months old. She actually weighed 9 pounds when she came home. She was super malnourished and ill. And then 4 months later, we brought home Ezekiel, who at the time he was 6. Oh, I said Imani was 6. She's not. She's 7. So we brought Ezekiel home when he was 6, and now he is 13. And then a couple years later, we brought home a teenage son who was almost 14, and now he's 18. And another baby girl who is now 5, and she was 5 months when we brought her home. So we keep bookending our kids and going outside the birth order, which is a huge no-no, apparently. So that's one of the reasons people kept saying you're going to destroy your family.
But God knows.
But God knows, yes. And we're all, still kicking. We're not destroyed.
Right, clearly. So talk about just obviously many, but struggles and challenges that have kind of stood in the way of the things that you felt like God was calling you to, whether that's, you've just mentioned some external stuff, but anything internal with you that, doubts or fears that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So I mentioned one of our kids almost not joining our family because we got scared. So the situation with him is we knew that we were placed with Imani, who was our first little daughter to come home. And we just really felt like the Lord was asking us to also bring home an older boy. And so on the backside of our agency's website, there are just pages and pages of these children who are either, have special needs or maybe a little bit older. And, older kids are harder to place than babies. And we would just pray over each of those faces that the Lord would bless them and they would feel his love and that they would find a family. And one night while we were praying over these kids, Ezekiel's face just, I don't know, there was just something about him. And it wasn't that he was cuter than the rest because they're all darling. But there's something about him. So we asked our agency for some more information. At the time, they would just send a little DVD that was like nothing. It was 60 seconds of him playing soccer in, the the orphanage grounds and him saying the ABCs in English. And so within this time, as they're sending it out to us, we're starting to ask for just prayer from people around us, for wisdom and discernment. But just really feeling like this feels right. This feels exciting and scary, but it feels right. And every single person not said, do not do this. We did not have one single person in our lives that said that we should do it. And so we did. We got scared, and we hadn't been married very long. I had gotten pregnant initially just a couple months after we had gotten married. And it's not like we dated very long. So I think that everyone was like, what are they doing? This is too much. This is too fast. And they're going outside their birth order. And what are they? I don't know. Just what are they doing? So I sent back the video and said, I'm so sorry to have wasted your time. I just don't think he's the right fit. So that was in August. And then in November, when we got the call saying to come pick up Imani, our director of our agency said, hey, by the way, that little boy that you were looking at all those months ago, he's actually been moved from a couple minutes or he's been moved from several hours, like many, many hours outside of Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, to just 15 minutes away from where we would be staying. Would we like to come meet him? She said he would have no idea that you were there to see him. Just bring some jump ropes and some candy or, whatever, and just come play with the kids for the afternoon. And you could take a tour and just, act like you're there to just be with the kids. And so come out between Ben and I that we still prayed for this little boy every single day, thought about him all the time. And neither of us brought it up because we just thought that the door had closed. And so we fly into Addis Ababa and head his way before we even head to pick up our daughter, Imani. And he was the first one to run out the door as we pull into their complex. And he immediately starts playing soccer with my husband. And I'm just kind of leaning against the van, just watching them, and the little girls are starting to braid my hair because it was super long at the time. And I just almost audibly heard the Lord whisper in my ear, "This is your son." And I'm just like, oh God, I didn't even realize it was God at first. I was like, oh Lord, I just pray that this little boy finds a family. He's just darling. He seems so sweet. And we didn't know at the time he was actually the only one in that orphanage that didn't already have a family. So just over and over, this is your son, this is your son. And I was like, oh, that's funny. No, he finds a family. And just over and over and over, just that one phrase until it hit me. Oh my gosh, this is God talking to me. And this is my son. And then I got real choked up, and I'm not a crier at all. My husband and I joke that we are too Scandinavian to cry. And and I got all choked up, and I was like, oh my gosh, Lord, that's my son, and he lives in an orphanage, and that's not okay. We need to get him home. And so we were there for several hours and just had such a fun time with all these kids, and left and headed to go get Imani. And she, again, was just so super ill. She was wearing preemie diapers. Actually, preemie diapers were too big on her.
Oh my gosh. Huge
distended tummy, just like you see on TV. Mm-hmm. But she was just completely skin and bones. So we were, and she had bronchitis for 4 of her 5 months of living. And they just didn't ever take her into a doctor or anything. So she was really in bad shape. So we spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital and various doctors and getting her. We were just so wrapped up in her health that we didn't even have a conversation about Ezekiel. And the night before we were to leave, Ben said, we need to talk about Ezekiel. What do you think? And I said, well, I know 100% what I think, but I need to hear it out of your mouth first. So I think even then I was still a little scared and maybe even testing God a little bit. And he said exactly what I felt and just really felt 100% like we were supposed to do it. So the next morning we called our in-country lawyer and started the process. And we did go back over to his orphanage the morning that we left. And we have a photo that's so darling of the head of his orphanage telling him that we are his parents. Like, we're standing right in front of him, and just the look of excitement and joy on his face is just so precious. So yeah, we brought him home 4 months later. He didn't speak a single word of English. Oh my gosh. Except for some, Bible songs that he had learned in the orphanage.
I'm hitting pause on the interview for just a second so I can tell you a little bit about Patreon. I've just launched my page, and this is a great way for you to get more involved with the Devoted Dreamers podcast and express your confidence and support for helping women find the strength, courage, and camaraderie we all need to pursue our God-shaped dreams. And no matter what you personally decide about giving to my Patreon campaign, I will continue to interview amazing women who will encourage us all, because this is my passion. I so love introducing you to women who are following their God-shaped dreams, mostly so that you might do the same. But if you've gotten incredible value from these interviews, I would love to invite you to consider becoming a patron of the Devoted Dreamers podcast. You can find my page at patreon.com/Devoted Dreamers podcast. There you can read and listen to a video about why I'm doing all of this and hear all the benefits of getting more involved in the show. One of those things is a patron feed on the site where you can access early release content and additional perks as a thank you for choosing to get more involved as a loyal friend and follower of the podcast. This is special content just for you if you choose to be a patron. My goal here is to really build a community because I needed encouragement to follow my dream, and I know that you do too. So I hope you'll consider getting involved. Check it out over at patreon.com/Devoted Dreamers podcast.
And you said he was, 13 at the time?
He was 6.
He was 6. It was your older one that was, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So you did you already have 2 at home?
Yeah. So we had our blondies, and then Imani had come home. Mm-hmm. And then we went back 4 months later.
4 months later. Oh my goodness. So how do you think back on that time in your lives where everyone around you, everybody always says, well, talk to your community when you're making a big decision. Mm-hmm. What do you think back on now with that of like, everybody said, no, don't do this. Like, mm-hmm. What do I do with that? If I'm in your space and having, whatever different circumstances, but everyone in my community is telling me no.
Right. I think really what it comes down to is this is your calling. It's not their calling. So there's a good chance that they will feel differently than you. And if you're married, you need to make sure that you and your spouse are completely on the same page. I think that, I often have women come up to me when I'm speaking saying, oh, I've wanted to adopt since I was in junior high and my husband doesn't feel the same. And I'm thinking, after hearing your talk, I think I'm just going to start researching it for us. And I'm like, no, you stop right now. Mm-hmm. Do not begin down this road until you're both on the same page, even if that means it takes 2 decades. Just pray that if this is something from the Lord, again, whether it's adoption or something completely different, if this is from the Lord, he will absolutely bring it to both of you. He's not going to whisper it in one pair of ears and not in the other. And this is too big and hard of a calling to not have, you both completely on board. So even if your community or your extended family doesn't necessarily agree with what you're doing, it kind of goes back to the whole leave and cleave bit in the Bible. And I don't remember where that is right now, but you know, you and your spouse are a team. And although we would love for, you know, our extended family or our community and close friends to agree with what we're doing all the time, you know, sometimes they're not going to. And now they love our children and can't imagine life without them, and, you know, can't imagine ever saying those words. But so we've had a lot of people come back and apologize. I'm so glad that you did not listen to us.
Yeah.
But it is hard at the time.
Oh gosh, I can imagine. You're like, we're on this island all by ourselves. Yeah. Who's gonna be there if we, you know, crash and burn?
Right.
Well, I love that. Just reminder of, you know, trusting the calling that God's put on your heart, and you know, if you're married, taking that to your spouse and making sure you're on the same page, and really being diligent about that, like not talking yourself into like, well, he'll come along,
right?
You know,
right.
But I would love to hear if there's like a verse of scripture that you lean on when, you know, you're in that space where you're like, I've just got to rely on him, and know that God's calling is his calling, and I'm not making this up, that kind of thing.
Well, my favorite verse, I love lots of verses.
Yeah.
Dorky, like Bible nerd. But I just really, really love Acts 4:13. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished and took note that these men had been with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it just reminds me that, you know, we don't have to go to seminary. We don't have to get a PhD. We don't need to, you know, have been a believer for, I don't know, since we came out of our mother's womb, to understand what the Lord is asking of us, and to do big things in his name, and to do things that don't seem normal. I mean, in this situation with Peter and John, they were talking with the Sanhedrin, and, you know, these guys they went to synagogue to worship, but they didn't have that schooling. And they held their own, and they taught, and they, you know, brought scales off of people's eyes as they were sharing the truth of Jesus. And I think that we can all do that.
Absolutely. I love that verse too. Just that they were unschooled, ordinary men. It's like, yeah, we're all kind of ordinary.
Yeah.
Don't have to have this special qualification.
Right.
Well, what advice would you give to the listener who is, you know, either in that place that you were in your, you know, early 20s of trying to figure out the dream, or, you know, someone trying to take the next step? What would you say to her?
I would say to really make sure that you're in the Word every day, not sporadically, and I don't mean you have to sit down for an hour a day necessarily, but spend that time, especially if you can do it in the morning, to start your day off like that. But whenever you have the ability to sit down with your Bible, do. And to take silence in your day. So maybe turn off the radio in your car when you're driving, you know, every now and then, or don't turn on the TV for background noise. I'm a big Audible fan, so I often have a book reading to me, and I need, you know, I know about myself that I need to sometimes just turn that off. And I think that we often feel like we are not hearing the Lord, but our life is so loud and busy and full that it's not that he's not talking, but it's that we're not quiet enough to listen. Mm-hmm. So make sure that you're taking that time of stillness. If you just go for a walk, or even if you're running in your neighborhood, maybe, leave your earbuds out, and just see what he has to share with you.
We don't do that often enough, do we?
Yeah, it's hard.
It is hard. There's so many things to distract ourselves with.
Yep.
Well, I would love to have you talk about some of your favorite books, and you can start off with your own, because we do need to hear a little bit about that since it's like launch week of your book. So please.
Yes. My favorite book of all time is my book. I'm just kidding. But yeah, Beautifully Interrupted is its name. But other than that, gosh, I love all of Shauna Niequist's books. I am a huge, huge fan of hers. Anything by Jenny Allen is an absolute favorite. Gosh, I'm trying to think. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. Fervent by Priscilla Shirer is another favorite. Circle Maker is another just incredible book on prayer.
Any other podcasts?
My friend Mandy Arioto, she is the CEO of MOPS. She has just started one, and it's awesome. And Jessica Honiger, her Going Scared podcast is awesome. And
just started listening to that one.
Yeah, it's fun. I used to live in San Antonio, and our pastor's wife is good friends with her. And I went to her second ever trunk show when she had just barely started Noonday at my pastor's house.
Wow.
So it's so fun to see just how big God is and where he's taken that big dream into a big reality.
Well, her, I think I just listened to one. That podcast is fairly new, but I just love her. Just started listening to Going Scared. I feel like it's a nice compliment to Devoted Dreamers, because she's talking about, taking risks and stepping forward, even if you're terrified of what might happen next. So love, like you said, having watched her business and ministry grow, and now sharing some of the stories with us.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, the offer that you had to share with the listeners, will you talk about that a little bit? Your Bible Nerd 14-day Bible study?
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of a funny story. So I am a big Bible nerd, and I just think the Bible is so exciting and interesting, and especially the Old Testament. I am just in love with the Old Testament, and I think that a lot of people, if I'm saying that, their eyes are going to glaze over and going to be like, that sounds like the most boring thing on the planet. But it is so chock full of drama and intrigue, and it's just like a soap opera with, biblical, Jesus takeaways, kind of like,
right.
It's amazing. And so I really wanted to have a line of mugs and t-shirts and prayer journals and all this cute stuff. I had asked my friend Amy Cavs, who's an incredible artist, to do these fashion illustrations of these girls reading the Bible, and they were just really fun. And I kind of got overzealous and spent all my money on the artwork. So I didn't have the money to invest in the cute shirts and cups and mugs, journals and all that stuff. So I thought, well, I've got all these cute images, so now I need to figure out what to do with them. And I thought, well, I'll just write a little Bible study. And just to teach people how to study the Bible without a pre-written study. So, you can grab your Bible and open it up. And I think a lot of us just feel overwhelmed. Like, where do I start? Do I start at the beginning? Do I start in the New Testament or the Old Testament? I where do you even begin? And how long do you do it for? And do you just read it, or do you what do you do? And so that's where it really came from. And so it's a part of the pre-ordering goodies, which obviously are not available anymore. But I really wanted for your listeners to at least get this little fun bit. And it was around when Beautifully Interrupted was initially being shopped out to various publishers. And Nav Press was not interested in Beautifully Interrupted, but they were interested in talking to me about Bible studies. So I've actually signed on with them for 3 Bible studies that I'm going to start here as soon as everything wraps up with all the Beautifully Interrupted stuff, getting it launched out. So I'm really, really excited about what the Lord did with some fashion illustrations that never ended up on a t-shirt or mug.
But they are in the Bible study?
But they are in the Bible study. Yes.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay. So people can get that how? Just by going to your website?
Yes. Why don't we, let's see. So if you go to my website, on the sidebar, there will be an opportunity to just put in your email and it'll be emailed right to you.
Great. It's called Bible Nerd 14-Day Bible Study, and it helps you study the Bible without a Bible study.
Yeah.
I love it. I think that's great. That sounds really simple.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll do that. Well, I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation today, hear a little bit of your story. I know that we didn't get to cover, even a quarter of the story that God is writing in your life. But I thank you for
a lot of great stuff and a lot of just really hard stuff.
Yeah.
That have been worth it because, the Lord knows a lot more than we do.
Absolutely. Well, keep on with your perseverance in all of that. And I know that having 6 kids of any age was probably quite trying. But yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit of that with us. And I would love for you to just close us out, answering the question of how this experience of stepping out in faith and trusting God in what He's called you to, how has that changed you?
It definitely has given me a lot more grit and helped me realize that life is an adventure. My parents used to always say that, but I might just have to be back someday to share more stories, but we lived in Guatemala for a couple years when I was in middle school, and it was a time of civil unrest, and there were several coups while we were there, and my parents just, every time something hard or scary happened, my parents would be like, it's an adventure, life's an adventure. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm tired of adventure. I do not want adventure. I want a small life. I want security. I want anything that does not include adventure. So the fact that the Lord has gotten me to a place where I am comfortable in being uncomfortable is just an incredible testament to how He does change hearts and minds. And I think that's part of why I never wanted kids, because it seemed unpredictable and just scary. And obviously the Lord has massively changed my heart with that. But He's just a good God, and He really does know what He's doing.
If you have forgotten to involve God in your plans, this was the episode for you. Okay, there was so much Teresa and I could have talked about in this conversation, but I really loved getting to hear about the shift inside her from having one particular plan set out in her early 20s to move to Italy and be an art curator, and then move into those years of waiting on God and realizing what was not the plan, but wondering why He had her in certain places, and then later figuring out that his plan for her life was totally different than the path that she had set out on. If you are in the early stages of dreaming, or just even wondering what your dream is, this whole story might feel intimidating or scary. Like, what if I choose the wrong path, go the wrong way, or miss what God's trying to show me? And actually hear that sentiment verbalized in different ways, but I hear it quite often from listeners as a very real fear that what if I just miss it, that God's trying to show me something and I just totally miss it. And what I want to say to you is just continue to listen for his voice. If you're not sure what that sounds like, be faithful to pursue him, seek him, ask him to help you to hear his voice, and then trust with a sincere heart that he is going to answer that prayer, that he wants to answer that prayer. And then take a deep breath and keep going. I don't think the answer comes all at once, but I do believe you'll be able to look back one day and see his work in your life, his voice that you've been listening to, and the path that he had you on all along. So here are my top 3 takeaways from this conversation. Number 1, the Lord put you here in this time and place for a purpose. So like I just said, I really don't think you're going to miss that. You might take a meandering road to get there, but I don't think you're going to miss it. And his purpose for you is good. And there is one, in case you're doubting that. But he had you born into this time and this place for a reason. Takeaway number 2, when Teresa talked about that struggle in her season of waiting, I thought that was really, it touched me, a place in me where I waited for a really long time for a lot of answers from the Lord. But I love the reminder in that it's in the waiting where our roots get a chance to grow down deep into the soil and create a foundation for what's to come in the purpose. So we hate that season of unknown, of what's God going to have for me next. She described it as feeling like winter. But I think we can trust that he's doing work in us, even if we can't see it. And then finally, takeaway number 3, I loved this, that if you pray for open doors, you can't actually be frustrated when God closes some of the doors because he's working on something better for you. He can't open all 7 doors and then you know which one to walk through. He's got to close 6 of them. So it's really clear, like, hey, here's the one that's for you. So I'm sure you have some of your own thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Could you please join us over in the Devoted Dreamers Facebook group and share what's rolling around in your head following this conversation? And then joining the conversations already going on there. We would love to have you and have you join us and give you the support that you need to take the next step toward your God-shaped dream. You will find us on Facebook in the Devoted Dreamers Insiders group. Okay, and you know what's so fun? I've been asking for your reviews to help me reach a goal of 50 reviews on Apple Podcasts by the end of May. And guess what? You did it. I logged in today and saw 52. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts about the show to help other devoted dreamers find us and join in the conversation. And if you haven't left a review yet, it's not too late. Just head on over to Apple Podcasts and do that there. And here's one, a recent one from, I don't know if I got this right, Wabanob, entitled So Affirming and Life-Giving. She says, Devoted Dreamers was recommended to me by a close friend, and I'm so grateful. Merritt has a gentle voice, but boldly encourages us to follow our God-shaped dreams. Her podcast granted me the permission I needed to take my first step in following God's persistent call for me to write, even in my season of raising 3 small boys. Now I'm writing any chance I can, and I open an Instagram account for my writing at Tending Wild. Merritt also created a Facebook community to champion our dreams and is accessible and welcoming in that space. I hope and know that this podcast will encourage you in taking your next bold step as well. Okay, wow. Ashley, I looked you up on Instagram, so I know your name. Thank you so much for sharing the practical ways that this podcast has helped you take the next step. I love hearing about your writing, and I pray that the Lord continues to show you those next steps and give you more little moments where you can write what He's put on your heart. What an awesome testimony. I'm excited to hear more from you in the Facebook group. And welcome to the tribe. And hey to the rest of you, thank you so much for all the ways that you're sharing the show with others, whether that's in person or online. I love seeing your posts pop up and connecting with women, your friends, who wouldn't have otherwise heard of the show if you hadn't shared it. So I so appreciate that. If you want to share this episode with somebody, this is a great time to do so while you're still listening. Before you close your app, just click in the top right, those 3 little dots, and it will give you an opportunity to either share on social media or grab a link that you can text or email to somebody. But it's your personal recommendations that helps the show grow, and I certainly appreciate it every time you share it out. And hey, I also wanted to remind you, there at the end, Teresa had some great book suggestions for us. And if one of those intrigued you, or you ever decide to purchase a book you heard about here on the Devoted Dreamers podcast, would you consider doing that through the Amazon link in the show notes at meritonsa.com/podcast or in the show description below right here in your app. This is one of the easiest ways to support the podcast without it costing you a dime. Thank you so much every time you do that. And again, you'll find the show notes for this episode at meritonsa.com/podcast/91. Specifically for this week, you can connect with Teresa, find the resources she and I talked about, especially her free Bible Nerd 14-day guide to studying the Bible on your own. I love that. I think that could be so helpful. And she didn't mention this when we were live on the audio, but she's also got a Facebook group for anyone who's downloaded the guide, and I will see if I can link to that as well. And if you want to go right now to grab that free guide while you're listening, you can find it on her website at teresaswanstromanderson.com. Then you'll just click on the blog in the navigation and scroll down to where it says Study God's Word on Your Own. Enter your email address, and I think it'll be on its way right to you. You'll also find some timestamp takeaways from the interview, so if there's something you'd like to go back to, this is your little cheat sheet to help you find that. I want to remind you that Season 4 is coming to a close soon. The final episode is scheduled for June 6th, and then I will be on maternity leave for the rest of the summer and returning with Season 5 in the fall. But between now and then, I'm not going to leave you hanging. Please keep checking back. I've got some bonus episodes and a handful of what I'm calling mini episodes planned for release in the month of June, July, and August, just in case you're missing me and the show. Those mini episodes will be just about 15 minutes. They're all topical with tips for pursuing your God-shaped dream. And finally, I want to take a second to acknowledge 2 special patrons of the Devoted Dreamers podcast, Bree Uten and Elizabeth Henry. Both contributed at the $20 or higher level on my Patreon campaign. Their contributions, along with the other patrons of the show, are helping to cover a portion of my monthly expenses to bring you the Devoted Dreamers podcast. Ladies, thank you so much. And to everyone else who has contributed, it's so fun to see your support coming in each month as you advocate along with me for women and their God-shaped dreams. You all are amazing. And hey, if you haven't made a Patreon gift yet, you can still get in on the fun. Just visit my page at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Devoted Dreamers podcast. Thanks to Komaku, who provided the ad music for this episode. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for joining me in this conversation. And wherever you are with your God-shaped dreams, may you have the courage to take one step toward their realization today. I will see you next week.